What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back to talk about the offensive coordinator position for the Detroit Lions. Today, we're talking about an in-house option, potentially for the Lions, if Ben Johnson goes elsewhere. So let's get it started.
Fired up. It's made a great decision.
Great teammates, coaches, and other people who want to be Super Bowl champions. And we are. We're going to do it this year.
And we're going places, because we want to go places.
Touchdown, Detroit Lions!
Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Welcome everybody to a video. Glad you guys are here. And we are back to talk about the offensive coordinator situation. Now, first off, as y'all see it, man, we got the seatbelt gang shirts on. Hey, look, you could get these on the Dodge Shop, okay? So if you want to check them out, Dodge Shop, link in the description. Capital D, capital O, capital D, no spaces, shop. Dodge Shop, put it on Google. Hotmail, that's not a thing. That might be a thing. I don't know. Google, search, Microsoft. Stop. In today's video, we're going to talk about this offensive coordinator position. Thinking about this a little bit more. Again, if I'm a team out there that's looking to go the offensive coordinator route for my next head coach, without being able to interview the candidates like the teams get to, I'd be looking at it from my perspective saying, I'm hiring that guy. I'm hiring Ben Johnson. Now, of course, there's bias to that because I see all the Lions games. But, man, to see what he has done this season, I'd be like, I'm hiring that guy. If that's the direction I'm going. Now, some teams, it doesn't look like they're going that direction, whether it's like the Denver Broncos, who seem to be interviewing guys that have all coached before. They seem to kind of want to go that direction. So not every team seems to be in that business. But Ben Johnson is scheduled to have 3 head coaching interviews, and this is going to update. That's just by the time I'm recording this. One of them has now been completed with the Houston Texans, and also Carolina Colts are set to have scheduled interviews with him as well. By the way, Aaron Glenn is also, I believe, scheduled to have an interview with the Indianapolis Colts. But again, if I'm a team looking at it, I'm going the offense coordinator route, I would think I'm hiring that guy. But of course, I would love to keep Ben Johnson. I think he's earned that opportunity for sure. But I would love to keep Ben Johnson around. But if not, then as we talked about in our last video about having to replace that, and that's kind of part of the job. And if you're doing well, that's what's going to happen. Guys are going to get plucked, and then you're going to have to find a way to replace them. Not to say that it's easy, but you're going to have to find a way to do so. And in this video, we're not going to be going through like 10 different candidates or something like that. First off, Ben Johnson hasn't went anywhere yet. Okay, so when that happens, then we'll definitely dive into it if that does happen. But at the same time, this just hit me because I was looking at our coaching staff, and one guy that stuck out, he just stuck out big time. Like, I had a couple guys in mind. Of course, you know, there's the Deuce Staley's, the Mark Brunells, but none of those, like, we'll talk about those a little bit. But the one guy that stuck out on that list to me, and there was another guy that I kind of already came in with thinking about, so we'll talk about that as well. And I'm just like, man, this makes a ton of sense. It seems to make a ton of sense. Now, from my position, they know much better what these guys are doing for their team and, you know, what would make sense. And again, I'm not really questioning who Dan Campbell hires here because I feel like he's done a pretty good job. First thing that we loved about Campbell when he got here is the coaching staff that he put together, really top to bottom. We've had to adapt, make changes, right? You halfway through the year, Anthony Lynn loses his playing calling responsibilities. They part ways at the end of the season. And obviously Ben Johnson, well, that was a hit, all right? Now, hey, maybe it was just kind of luck. Hey, you found this guy, bigger part of the offense, and look what he's doing. But it was a hit. Right, you fire Aubrey Pleasant halfway through the season. That was tough, but the defense, you know, seemingly got better. Now, that's not to say that was Aubrey Pleasant. I don't believe that's what it was. I think it was getting healthier and things like that. But the point is that Dan, to this point, has done a pretty good job hiring the coaching staff. We can give him credit for that. From special teams, I believe Aaron Glenn is a good coach for us, and then of course Ben Johnson and what he did this past season. So you look in-house situations because when a guy like Ben Johnson, who was already there, gets promoted to that position at offensive coordinator, which, by the way, he had never been an offensive coordinator before, someone has to basically take on the role that he had before. And that guy that took on the role that he had before he was promoted to being offensive coordinator is the guy that I think just makes a ton of sense if you're looking at in-house options for the Detroit Lions. So that guy that I want to discuss, and I want to discuss another one as well, is Tanner Ingstrand. Now, I may be saying that last name really wrong. I tried to even watch videos on how to pronounce the dude's name, and they were rolling their R's and stuff. I mean, look, I can't do that. So I'm just Tanner Ingstrand. I'm going to stick to saying Tanner. That way I'm not saying it wrong over and over and over. But this guy just stands out. His resume, where he's been, what he's done, it just makes sense. Now, again, I don't know exactly what he's doing, but I can tell you that this past season for the Detroit Lions, he was the passing game coordinator, which is the role that he took on, of course, when Ben Johnson was promoted. Also, keep in mind, Aubrey Pleasant being fired, he was also tagged with that label as well. And then on top of that, he was the tight ends coach, which we know that's what Ben Johnson was before becoming, of course, our offensive coordinator. So you think kind of following in the same footsteps. But even more so, this guy has been an offensive coordinator before, which Ben Johnson hadn't been an offensive coordinator before. I mean, that one was one that kind of came out of nowhere, right? When we first heard his name, it was like, oh, he's a bigger part of the offense. It kind of came out of nowhere. Well, this guy's actually done it before. He's 40 years old, and I hate to throw up age because, you can coach as long as you want, right? I don't have an issue with age. But I just point out he's 40 years old, so he's still very young. And you take a look at what he's done and where he's been. Well, this is a former quarterback, which I always like. I like the former quarterbacks. I think it's cool. If you're going to play, I like, my player to be a former quarterback, to be offensive coordinator. That's always nice. Here's another thing that's interesting because you're going to see San Diego. We're going to talk about that a lot. San Diego ties. Lions got some San Diego ties now, okay? Todd Wash, San Diego. Dave Phipp, San Diego. Lions got San Diego ties. They do within their coaching staff already. And I will point this out there as we're focused on this guy. I know there's other guys like the Deuce Staley's and the Hank Fraley's and all the other assistant coaches. And I do feel like it's a pretty tight group where everybody seems to kind of have an idea of what's going on. Like even Todd Wash. Like you'll see them, him talking with the offense, talking with the quarterback. I don't know what they're talking about, right? Hey, maybe did you see that? You see where he's winning here and some just to look out for. But they all seem to kind of understand what's going on. But this guy just seems to make sense. Take a look on the left there, San Diego. He started off as a graduate assistant. He was hired and brought in. Jim Harbaugh was the head coach at that time. So that's how we kind of got into it. 2011, he becomes the offensive coordinator for San Diego. 2013, he had a little bit more added to his title as not only being the offensive coordinator, but also the assistant coach, which is currently the title that Deuce Staley has on our coaching staff. Also the quarterback's coach. Now on the left there, I went through each season. All right, I did the math, pulled out the calculator, and I did the math. So if these are a little off, I apologize. But these are the numbers that those offenses put up every year that he was the offensive coordinator, as well as their record in those seasons. Now they play in the FCS. One thing's for sure, they seem to struggle, with the North Dakota States when it came to the playoffs, things like that. But in the FCS, they were pretty darn dominant. 2013, 39 points per game. That's not a mistype. That's when he added the title of assistant head coach for this offense in 2013. They also ranked nationally top 10 in 8 different categories offensively in 2013. And you can just see it, right? Their worst year was 26 points per game. But just look at the numbers. I mean, those are outstanding. Through that time span of him as the offense coordinator, that's a 63-18 record, I believe. I tend to look at the quarterback as well because it was kind of hard to find stats on this and team stats and things like that. I look at how the quarterbacks did within, the offense with him because you always have a ton of moving pieces. Well, go back to 2013, and if you take 2013 and all the quarterbacks that they had, starters, okay, not quarterbacks that played like 2 games or something, but the starters from 2013 to 2017, they put up a combined 137 touchdown passes to 31 interceptions. That is a fantastic touchdown to interception ratio. And that was with 3 different quarterbacks. 2013, he had Mills as his quarterback, who completed 66% of his passes. Now listen to this stat line. 66% of his passes, 35-5 touchdown interception ratio, and 314 passing yards a game. That's a ridiculous stat line. 2014, new quarterback, Williams is in. He was a sophomore at the time. 21-9 touchdown interception ratio. Completed 54% of his passes, about 200 yards a game. Then he moved to 2015. And from 2015 through 2017, it was the same starting quarterback from the information I gathered, Lawrence. And if you look at his numbers, first season, 23 touchdowns, 6 picks, 217 yards a game, 64% completion percentage. 2016, 68% completion percentage, 25 touchdowns, 8 picks, 250 yards a game. 2017, the final year there. You could see what they scored as a team. Notice 36.3 points per game and 39.7 points per game in the final 2 seasons with this quarterback. 66% of his passes were completed, 33 touchdowns to 3 interceptions, and a 240 yards per game. Those are the numbers that I was able to find from 2013 to 2017 that the starting quarterbacks put up. You guys know if I can find anything that I think is a little bit interesting, I'm going to try to share those. So let's give a little bit more background in his time with San Diego. A couple things that stuck out here. So going back 2009, he is promoted to the quarterback's coach. Now, 2 things. First thing, coaching changes. Coaching changes at the top. Now, we know usually when there's coaching changes, you have a lot of turnover that usually goes on. Now, good thing for San Diego is that when they had this first coaching change, they went to Ron for their head coach in 2007. They were coming off of an 11-1 season. So they really didn't need to make a whole bunch of coaching staff changes because it wasn't that everybody was getting fired. They had a good season before. So Tanner Ingstrand stuck on the coaching staff, listed as an offensive assistant. As we know, he was an offensive assistant working with the running backs at that time, given the title to work with the running backs in 2007 and 2008, with Ron coming in as their new head coach. That same head coach promoted him to being the quarterback's coach in 2009. Now, what he said about him at the time was he has a really good understanding of the pass game concepts, and he did a really good job with our running backs before. And on top of that, he is a former quarterback. So they then made him the quarterback's coach. So former quarterback, he worked with running backs. Now he's going to work with our quarterbacks. He understands the pass game. Same coach then in 2011 promotes him to being the offensive coordinator, okay? So this is the same guy promoting him through. Now he becomes the offensive coordinator. And at the time said that he had a sound understanding of their passing game concepts, okay? So he promotes him to offensive coordinator. Then we have a coaching change. In 2013, we have a coaching change. Now Lindsey takes over as the head coach, and once again, sticking with this coaching staff, but on top of that, also getting more added to his title, as we said, becoming now the assistant head coach to go along with the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach of this team. So he gets a little bit more added to his title with another coaching change. So that stands out. Now, when he left San Diego, after obviously a great tenure that he had there as an offensive coordinator, 2017, his final year there, he was a finalist for coordinator of the year. On top of that, when he left and then he went on to Michigan to be an analyst, and his quarterback that was happy for him, Lawrence at the time, the final year that he's there, was then in the conversation for the Walter Payton Award, which would have been, the best offensive player at that time. He was given a lot of credit for developing him within that offense, as we hit on the numbers and how outstanding he was. 33 touchdowns to 3 picks in his final season. He had an incredible 3 years there, and clearly numbers-wise, he really improved. At the same time, the head coach at the time, Lindsey, really credited Tanner Ingstrand for being the offensive coordinator. He said, over the last 5 years, I can't take any of the credit for this. This guy has become a very, very good play caller. He has a really nice changeup to keep the defense off balance. West Coast type of offense, which is interesting. Run, pass, very balanced offensively. As we saw for the most part, they were pretty balanced offensively that utilized a lot of motion. Sounds like us. The West Coast type of offense. And then on top of that, stretching the field horizontally and vertically. So just by that description alone, it sounds like that it would fit. And obviously what we know about the defensive side of the ball is guys like Aaron Glenn, guys that are kind of in the same department. I don't know if that's the right word. I can't remember what your word Aaron Glenn used for it, but guys that are kind of from the same tree, right? They're coming from the same idea of how they want to do things concept-wise, how they want to do things schematically. So you would assume offensively it's the same idea, that they're coming from kind of, this is how we want to do things. They're coming from sort of a similar background, and at the same time, we are, like we touched on, the connections to San Diego. Another little note that I thought was interesting is that if you go back 7 years, they were doing a coaching clinic, and there was a lot of top names there. Sonny Dykes, who spent time with Jared Goff with Cal. You had guys like David Shaw, who's now interviewing for head coaching jobs once again. Long from San Diego State University. And he was the guy that stood out at a football clinic. After that, he became a Michigan analyst in 2018. Now, what's interesting, okay, I'm not going to say I know everything that he did, but I do know that that's not necessarily involved with the players. You can't get involved with the players here. You're kind of doing the behind the scenes work, okay? So we saw it from kind of that angle, the analyst side, stat tracking, I would assume, all those kind of things. So that's what he did in the background. Again, reuniting with Jim Harbaugh with Michigan. They went 10-3 that season, 14th in the country, and then became the DC Defenders offensive coordinator. Now, this league shut down, so it didn't last. They only played 5 games. They had 5 more scheduled. It ended. They were 3-2 in those 5 games. Cardell Jones was the starting quarterback, the former Ohio State quarterback, and you can see as a team, they only averaged 16.4 points per game. It was a very small sample size. It was 31, 27, 9, 0, 15. Cardell Jones, what really held his stat line back is that in one game he had 0 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. That's going to mess up your stat line. On that 5-game season, though, he had a 54% completion percentage, 4 touchdowns, 7 picks, 57.9 pass rating. So yeah, the one game with 0 touchdowns, 4 interception really kind of pulled his numbers down there for sure. But he has experience as an offense coordinator twice, 2 different places. So that's huge. To join the Detroit Lions, and of course this past season, like we said, he was promoted into basically the position that Ben Johnson held before he became the offensive coordinator. Now I think this is interesting. I found this quote that Ben Johnson had back in the Senior Bowl time when we were trying to figure out who was going to be the OC. He was the interim head OC at that time, which was beneficial for him. But again, the difference here is that Ingstrand, and it's going to probably look a lot different, is the fact that he's been an OC. Ben Johnson had never been an offensive coordinator, so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But this is what Ben said coming into the year. Said personnel, of course, is going to affect what our offense is going to look like, and at that time they didn't know who they had. But he also said this offense is Campbell's view of the offense. It's what he wants to see, where he wants to go with it. He said that for offense, defense, special teams, this is a head coach-driven team. So I thought that was interesting, just kind of throw it out there. I would assume that's kind of the philosophy of what he wants this offense to look like. So you go in-house, right? If you went in-house with this move and it's still Dan Campbell's philosophy, that probably won't change. But at the same time, we know there's still a lot that they're putting into it. One thing that sticks out to me here is that when we hired Ben Johnson, he became the offensive coordinator. One guy that we also went out and grabbed to be our senior offensive assistant, which I remember I made a video, and I think this is worth checking out if you want to think about potentially if this guy could be an offensive coordinator candidate. Honestly, last year we did videos on offensive coordinator candidates because we didn't know who it would be, and we talked about a lot of the in-house options, so I think that's worth checking out. But guy that we brought in and hired to be our offensive assistant in 2022 for first-year offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, our senior offensive assistant, was John Morton. And I said John Morton was going to kind of be that guy. I said it like John Morton was going to be, kind of the name that starts to pop up this season, because I thought Ben Johnson, we started to hear about him. He was gaining some popularity. Obviously, now he may take off. But at the same time, I thought John Morton would be kind of be the next guy. And I can say this, I haven't really heard it. I may have missed it. I don't remember hearing, Dan Campbell bring up Tanner and his impact on the offense. Maybe he has, I just missed it. But I know he's brought up John Morton a few times and the impact and the help that he's added to this offense. And why I think this is intriguing is because, one, the first thing that came to mind is maybe this guy could be our next offense coordinator. Yeah, he's 50 years old. It doesn't seem likely because of the fact that his last two jobs now with us this past year and before has been as a senior offensive assistant. He was an offensive coordinator at one point going back to 2017 with the New York Jets. Now, we talked about this last year, kind of being maybe scapegoated out of this job, but you could see the improvement. He was like a passing game. He was an effective pass game guy. Like, he made the passing game better. That's just what he did. You see the numbers. Josh McCown had his best stretch of football ever under John Morton as the offensive coordinator. For some reason, he was fired. They were a disaster of a team, but for some reason, that happened. Regardless, though, then he goes into the Raiders as their senior offensive assistant. You see the numbers at the bottom and how the quarterback play continued to improve with him helping and being on that staff. Not to say that it's all him, but as an offensive coordinator, we saw with McCown, he brought the best out of Josh McCown. That guy came to mind because it was like, well, maybe we could make him the OC, and a good thing about that is he's been an OC at the NFL level, which Tanner has not been. He has been, and there definitely could be comfortability within that if you're Dan Campbell. We know he's praised him. Now he's praised John Morton and brought him up a few times, but there could absolutely be comfortability within within making the guy your offensive coordinator that's been an offensive coordinator. He has that impact and help over the passing game. I don't know who's all involved, like with what, and I know Dan knows that much better than we do because he's always in there, so he'll know. And if that's Tanner that's super involved, then maybe he's the guy that makes the most sense. I bring this name up. I think it's unlikely, but I think it's interesting because I think it's an interesting option. And two, I think this is a big reason we brought him in is because Ben had never been an offense coordinator. Now, he could stay. If he stayed this season, once again, like John Dorsey, if he stuck around for another year, then yeah, that could help out Tanner Ingstrand. The difference is, again, though, he's been an offense coordinator. He's taken charge of that room, and he was that for a stretch of time where they were a great offense for a very long stretch of time. And on top of that, you've seen it. Like, they've shown behind the scenes of him at San Diego being the offense coordinator, running the meetings, doing all of those things. So he's been in that position, right, with the DC Defenders kind of leading the team. So they had Cardell Jones, Tyree Jackson at that time. So it just hasn't been at this level, but it seems to make the most sense, right? As an in-house option, a guy with the pass game coordinator option that seems to make the most sense. I remember last year we talked about passing game, running game being maybe one of our concerns, right? Because it was like, well, Ben Johnson's more of a pass game guy. That's his background, not really the running side. One thing with Tanner Ingstrand, though, is that one, he has been a running backs coach. So if that, means anything, and that brings you to the ideas of the Deuce Staley's, and maybe Deuce Staley wants to do this, right? Remember, he was with Philly his entire career, running back coach. He wanted to become the OC. When they offered him to become the OC, they're like, well, you're not going to be able to call plays. So he's like, I'm not doing that. Turns it down. And then ultimately he leaves, comes to Detroit, and the big difference here was that more responsibility for him and also giving him the title of assistant head coach. That's something that really made him want to come here, and he did. It's just, is that the path he wants to go on? Is he looking to be the OC because the Lions could give him that opportunity? It'd be a definite first time. It seems like he would kind of understand everything the offense is looking for. Or is he going that path of becoming the head, trying to become a head coach and sticking within that, I'm going to be the assistant head coach, kind of play the Dan Campbell, what Dan Campbell was to Sean Payton, and then if we continue to be successful, now Deuce Staley is going to be someone that teams are on the lookout for because he'll be young. He would have been part of this. He would have learned right from him. His energy, he feels like a head coach type, right? So maybe he wants to go down that path and the Lions want to give him that first opportunity. That's very possible. And then you look at guys like Mark Brunell. Mark Brunell just doesn't feel like an OC candidate. He just feels to me like a quarterback coach. Just having seen him, it just doesn't feel like the offensive coordinator. It could be. Just doesn't feel like that. I could be wrong, however. But, the former quarterback being our quarterback coach kind of feels like he'll stay in that lane and stick with Goff. It just seems to make the most sense for him. But it is a possibility. Then you got guys like Hank Fraley, who's always been an offensive line coach, former offensive lineman. Could he be it? Maybe. Maybe flip to the defense side. Is there a guy on the defense side that could do it? I don't know. Tanner Ingstrand, though, in-house definitely makes the most sense to me, followed by Deuce Staley and John Morton. Okay, I think John Morton probably unlikely, but he's not like 100 years old or something. Like, the dude could definitely take back over that responsibility and do it, and he's had experience doing it, so there may be a lot of comfortability there. And if that's the case, I wouldn't be shocked, because it was a small stint as an OC, but he's done really well in the passing game, and Dan Campbell seems to really like what he's done for the Lions. But Tanner Ingstrand just kind of makes the most sense from the outside looking in. I think that's a very intriguing option to keep an eye on for the Lions. I'm going to leave that there. Just the in-house option I think is interesting. Of course, I want to keep Ben Johnson. We'll see what happens with that. We'll keep that updated, keep an eye on it. Also, at the same time, we'll probably look at outside candidates. Of course, if he ends up going elsewhere, we'll throw it and we'll take a look at outside candidates, those kind of things as well. But I think staying in-house is something that you would like to do. And if you feel like you have that guy there, especially after what we've done now, I think you would like to stay in-house. You can go out of house. It's just a risk. You don't know, right? Is it a guy that doesn't work out and it's like, well, we already made that move? That's a risk. There's a risk to that. And there's guys out there. But in-house, a lot of times feels like it makes no sense because you're kind of replacing guys. They work their way up through the job, then they get their shot at it. And since this guy has done it and he did it at a pretty high level, I could see that being the case.